The Spanish Grand Prix, a race where qualifying and track position is very, very important, and it proved to be the case once again. Hamilton started from pole, controlled the race from there, and for him, it came down to a couple of key moments. So let's have a little look at his weekend quickly. Starting with qualifying, we have some data between Hamilton and Bottas, and this is actually quite interesting because the two are so often separated by very little in qualifying. Now the teal colour is Lewis Hamilton on this speed graph, and the black dotted colour is Valtteri Bottas. And actually, if we look at the time gain, we can see that Bottas is up through the first 2/3 of the lap. That was evident in the sectors as well. He's very quick through the first corner, particularly good on the power out of turn 2, good through turn 4 as well, really quick through the apex of turn 8. And at that point, coming into turn 10, we have a look at the lap time difference, and he's almost 1/10.5 up on Lewis Hamilton with just one sector to go. And that's where it all goes wrong for him on this lap, turn 10. There's so little in it, and this hairpin left-hander. It's a tricky braking zone, but they brake at very, very similar points. Hamilton's maybe a fraction later, but there's really not much in it. But Hamilton doesn't slow down as quickly. He's not as hard on the brakes, and he particularly releases the brakes a little bit more in the late phase, which just runs a tiny smidgen of speed through to the apex. And from there, he's able to pick it up, the throttle slightly quicker than Bottas as well. He's quicker to full throttle, so he takes the gain on the exit as well. For Bottas, when he looks through this data, he must be so frustrated because there's not much you can do about these tiny little margins of just releasing the brake by a couple of bar of pressure. It's really fine margin stuff compared to going really quick in the fast corners. Bottas is really quick, turns 7 and 8. The difference in speed looks greater, but actually in the faster corners, there's less to make up. You're in the slower corners for a lot longer, and 1 kilometre an hour, 1 mile an hour difference is a bigger percentage of difference as well when you're going at 86 kilometres an hour rather than 170 kilometres an hour the corner before. So it's tough on Bottas, but this is what makes a racing driver quick. It's putting it all together, which Hamilton didn't necessarily do, but he did put together the slow corners. Turn 12, he takes a huge gain through the apex as well. But then actually look at the end of the lap, Bottas nearly gets him back out of the final corner. In fact, the last two corners, 13, then 14 and 15, and Hamilton's a little bit deep into all of these corners, and Bottas gets the exit. So if we flick back to the time compare, you can see the big spike up through turn 10 where Hamilton makes up basically his pole time. A little bit more at turn 12, which is important because then for the rest of it, Bottas actually comes back at him a lot out of the final corner, but it's not enough, and Hamilton takes pole position. Neither of them could improve on their second lap, which was a little bit strange. Normally the track should get a bit better and the drivers just dial in that a little bit more. No one could improve, so that lap stood. So the next thing for Hamilton is the start of the race. Barcelona is a particularly difficult track to start from the front on. It's a long run down to the first corner. It's very easy for the cars behind to get in the slipstream and attack down at turn 1. We've seen it a few times before, and we've seen some collisions there before as well when cars all arrive together down at the first corner. The slipstream effect is big. So Hamilton's got work to do, but he makes a perfect launch this time. You can see immediately off the lights how quick he is compared to Bottas. And look at Perez as well. On the second row, the racing point on the inside also gets away a little bit worse than Bottas. The inside of the track probably a little bit dirtier than the racing line, and that might explain why both Bottas and Perez have slipped back. And look at the really fast starts of Verstappen and Stroll as well, tucking in behind Hamilton. But what's really interesting now down to turn 1 is Valtteri Bottas. You can see as soon as he launches, he wants to try and get into the slipstream of Lewis Hamilton. But Max Verstappen's just there. He's just done enough to stop Valtteri coming across and picking up the toe from his teammate. To make it worse then, Bottas is also punching a hole for Lance Stroll, who's had a great start. He's picked up a double toe from Verstappen and Hamilton. Then he can pull out and try and attack on the inside of Bottas, which he does down to turn 1 as well. If we go on board with Bottas, having not claimed that slipstream, the better straight line speed down to turn 1, he tries to cover the inside. Then he starts looking right in his right mirror because he knows then Stroll's approaching from the inside. He actually brakes a little bit early, which allows Verstappen to sweep around the outside, and Stroll can get a bit aggressive with him then on the inside, and he does. And actually, if we stay on board with Bottas, he's then lost all momentum, and Sergio Perez comes back through and passes him on the outside of turn 2. So Bottas does well after that to keep his foot in at 3 and at least damage limit it to 2 places lost, but for Mercedes trying to fight with Lewis Hamilton for the race win, this was a really, really tricky start, and it left him with work to do. It took him a few laps to pass Lance Stroll. By then, Verstappen had opened up enough of a gap to not be under any pressure. Bottas had to close that gap down, and he never really put Max under significant pressure. Red Bull with Verstappen did a good job on the strategy. Bottas was lurking around a second and a half back, but Verstappen pitted early enough that Red Bull basically didn't give Mercedes a sniff of the undercut there. And then it came down to the end. Verstappen pitted again quite early for the second stop, and I was surprised that Mercedes pitted Bottas, especially pitted him onto the soft tyre, a used soft tyre, to try and pass Verstappen at the end of the race on a track that we know is difficult to pass on. There's only one really conventional overtaking spot, that's down to turn 1. Bottas was ticking along at an okay pace on his mediums, and I wondered if he maybe could have tried to go to the end, as we saw Perez do, as we saw Vettel do with good long stints. It seemed like an option with 17 seconds gap, 18 laps to go. Bottas was not in a bad position to try and hold on to second by doing a kind of quite brave one stop. But maybe after what's happened to the Mercedes tyres the last couple of Grand Prix, you can forgive them being slightly antsy and pitting a second time. But on those soft tyres, Bottas was never able to make any inroads for second place with Verstappen. Ended up pitting and taking fastest lap instead. But with his teammate marching away, Hamilton put in a great drive, 24 seconds clear in the race, showing Mercedes dominance still. Bottas not able to pass Verstappen, cost himself a few more points in the championship. He wasn't a happy chap after the race either. You could sense that he was deflated from this one. Qualifying, it was fine margins that cost him pole position. From that, maybe he could have won the Grand Prix, but races and titles are won on fine margins, and that's where Hamilton is just relentlessly so strong. So that was a look at the race at the front between the Mercedes and Verstappen. But for more of a look into Albon's race, what went on with Ferrari, and Grosjean's little tussle with Raikkonen, check into F1 TV.